The first time I realized my wife was cheating on me, I was fixing Mrs. Henderson's kitchen sink. Funny how life's biggest revelations come when you're elbow deep in someone else's plumbing problems. My phone buzzed against my hip, and Julia's voice cut through the afternoon like a rusty blade. "Tom, I need you to pick up Emma from school today. I'm running late with a client. Third time this week." I wiped my hands on my work shirt and checked the caller ID. Sure enough, she was calling from Scott Harlan's office. Again. "Which client?" I asked, knowing damn well what the answer would be. "The Morrison property. You know, the big colonial on Maple Street. I knew that property. Sold 3 months ago. To the Hendersons, actually, whose sink I was currently fixing." "Right," I said, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. "I'll get Emma." Julia had always been ambitious. When we met 15 years ago, she was selling insurance door to door with the determination of a missionary and the smile of a politician. I was a carpenter then, building custom cabinets for rich folks who paid me to make their kitchens look like something out of a magazine. We were both hungry, her for success, me for someone who understood what it meant to work for everything you had. Now she was the top real estate agent in our little corner of Ohio, and I was the guy who fixed whatever broke when the warranty ran out. Somewhere along the way, her hunger had turned into something else entirely. Emma was waiting by the school's front entrance when I pulled up in my beat-up Ford. At 12, she had Julia's sharp intelligence but my skeptical nature, a combination that made her dangerous at family gatherings. "Mom's working late again?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "Something like that." Emma studied my face with the intensity of a detective. "You look weird, Dad. Like when you found out Uncle Rick was using the business credit card for his golf trips. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe." That evening, Julia came home at 9:30, her hair slightly mussed and her lipstick completely gone. She had a story ready. Traffic, difficult clients, paperwork that couldn't wait. I listened while washing dishes, nodding at appropriate intervals, filing away each lie for future reference. "How was your day?" she asked, the question automatic and hollow. "Fixed the Henderson's sink." Picked up Emma. Made dinner. I paused, testing the waters. "Funny thing, Mrs. Henderson mentioned she bought her house 3 months ago. From you, actually." Julia's hand froze halfway to the wine glass. "Oh, right. Different client. The Peterson place. Another lie. The Peterson place had been demolished last year to make room for a strip mall. After Julia went to bed, I sat in my workshop in the garage, surrounded by the tools that had built our life together. My grandfather's hand planes, my father's socket set, the table saw I'd bought with my first real paycheck. Everything in its place, everything serving a purpose. Unlike my marriage. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Julia's social media. Photo after photo of her and Scott Harlan at business lunches, networking events, and client meetings. Scott with his perfectly styled hair and his mortgage broker smile. Scott, who'd been married to Angela for 18 years and had 2 kids in high school. The pieces were all there. I just hadn't wanted to see the picture they made. The next morning, Julia was gone before I woke up. Another early meeting. I made Emma breakfast and listened to her chatter about a science project while my mind worked through possibilities. "Dad, you're doing that thing again," Emma said, pointing her spoon at me. "What thing?" "The thinking thing. Your forehead gets all wrinkled and you look like you're solving a really hard math problem." Maybe I am. That afternoon, I drove past Scott's office. Julia's silver BMW was parked in the back lot, tucked between a dumpster and a maintenance shed where it wouldn't be visible from the street. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching the building's windows, until I saw them. 4th floor, corner office. Julia's unmistakable silhouette pressed against Scott's, their bodies moving together in a rhythm that had nothing to do with real estate. I drove home and called my brother-in-law, Rick. "Hey, Tom. What's up?" "I need to pull my investment out of the business," I said, without preamble. Silence. Then, "What?" Why? Is everything okay? Personal reasons. How quickly can you cut me a check? Tom, you're 40% of our operating capital. If you pull out now, how quickly, Rick? I'll need a few days to liquidate some assets, maybe a week. You have until Friday. I hung up before he could argue. Rick and Monica, Julia's sister, had been running their little construction company on my money for 3 years. Monica, who never missed a chance to remind everyone at family gatherings that Julia had married down. Monica, who thought I was too stupid to notice when the quarterly reports didn't add up. Time to find out how smart they really were. Friday came with the kind of gray October sky that made everything look like a black and white photograph. I was replacing a garbage disposal for the Millers when Rick called, his voice tight with panic. Tom, we have a problem. The business account is completely empty. I straightened up, wiping my hands on a shop rag. Empty how? Someone withdrew everything, $47,000. The bank says it was an authorized electronic transfer, but I never... His voice cracked. Monica's freaking out. She thinks someone hacked our accounts. Huh, I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. That's terrible. Have you called the police? We're going to, but Tom, without that money, we can't make payroll. We can't pay our suppliers. The Martinez job starts Monday and we don't have money for materials. Sounds like you need a good lawyer. Tom, please. We've been family for 10 years. If you could just... I hung up and went back to work. The garbage disposal hummed to life, grinding away whatever the Millers had tried to force down their drain. Sometimes the best solutions were the simplest ones. That evening, Julia was distracted during dinner, checking her phone every few minutes. Emma was telling us about her friend's birthday party when Julia's phone buzzed for the 5th time. Sorry, honey, Julia said to Emma, glancing at the screen. Mom needs to take this. She stepped into the kitchen, but I could hear every word. Monica, slow down. What do you mean the account is empty? A pause. How is that possible? Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean Tom pulled his investment? I kept eating my meatloaf, chewing slowly while Emma watched me with curious eyes. Dad, why is Aunt Monica crying? Sometimes adults make bad decisions with money, sweetheart. Julia returned to the table, her face pale. Tom, Rick called you today? Mm-hmm. He says you withdrew your investment from their business. That's right. Without discussing it with me? I set down my fork and looked at her directly for the first time in weeks. It's my money, Julia. From the sale of my father's property, remember? The property I inherited before we were married. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She'd forgotten that detail, probably because she'd been too busy thinking about Scott Harlan's hands on her body to pay attention to legal technicalities. But Monica and Rick are family, she said finally. So are we, I replied. At least, I thought we were. The next morning, I followed Julia to her networking breakfast at the Marriott downtown. She met Scott in the parking lot, and they disappeared into room 237 for 2 hours. I took pictures from my truck, the telephoto lens I'd bought for Emma's soccer games finally serving a useful purpose. While they were busy networking, I drove to Scott's house. Angela Harlan was in her garden, pulling up the last of her summer vegetables. She was a small woman with graying hair and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from raising children and keeping a household running while your husband plays businessman. Mrs. Harlan? I'm Tom Grady, Julia's husband. She looked up, squinting in the morning sun. Oh, hello. Julia's mentioned you. You're the handyman, right? That's right. I was wondering if I could ask you something. Has Scott been working a lot of late nights recently? Her face changed, the polite smile fading. Why do you ask? Well, Julia's been working with him on several big deals, and she's been coming home pretty late. I just wanted to make sure she wasn't keeping him from his family time. Angela stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Scott says he's been working on a big commercial development, something that could set us up for retirement. The Morrison project? That's the one. I nodded sympathetically. Julia mentioned that one, though I think the Morrisons already bought their house. From Julia, actually. 3 months ago. The color drained from Angela's face. I don't understand. Neither do I, Mrs. Harlan. Neither do I. I left her standing in her garden, staring at the dead tomato plants like they might suddenly bloom again. That afternoon, Pete Morrison called me. Pete had been my best friend since high school, back when we both thought we'd conquer the world with nothing but determination and bad judgment. Now he was a retired cop with too much time on his hands and a nose for trouble that retirement hadn't dulled. Tommy boy, you sound like shit. Thanks, Pete. Really what I needed to hear today. Monica's been calling everyone in town, crying about how you screwed over their business, says you're having some kind of midlife crisis. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Midlife crisis. That's one way to put it. What's really going on? I told him everything. The lies, the photos, the empty business account, Scott's wandering hands, and Julia's missing lipstick. Pete listened without interrupting, the way cops do when they're building a case. So what's your plan? He asked when I finished. I'm working on it. Need any help? Maybe. You still have contacts at the PI firm downtown? A few. What do you need? Everything I can get on Scott Harlan. Financial records, business dealings, where he goes when he's not supposed to be working late. That might cost you. I've got $47,000 I'm not using for anything else. Pete was quiet for a moment. Tom, be careful. Revenge is a funny thing. Sometimes it costs more than you're willing to pay. Pete, they already took everything that mattered. What's left to lose? That night, Julia came home with Chinese takeout and a guilty smile. She'd bought my favorite, sweet and sour pork from Golden Dragon, and she served it with the kind of exaggerated cheerfulness that meant she was hiding something big. So, she said, settling into her chair, Monica called today. I bet she did. She's pretty upset about the business situation. I'm sure. Tom, look at me. I looked. Julia was still beautiful at 37, with the kind of polished prettiness that came from good genes and expensive maintenance. But looking at her now was like looking at a photograph of someone I used to know. Rick and Monica made some mistakes, she said carefully. But they're family. Can't we work something out? What kind of mistakes? She hesitated. Monica might have used some of the business money for personal expenses. Nothing major, just how much? Maybe $15,000 over the past year. I nodded slowly. Monica had been skimming from the business account just like I'd suspected, but $15,000 was small change compared to what I'd pulled out. And Rick? Rick didn't know. Monica handled the books, another lie. I'd seen Rick's signature on the bank statements, had copies of his withdrawals for golf memberships and fishing trips. But I let Julia keep talking, digging the hole deeper with every word. The thing is, she continued, if their business fails, it's going to reflect badly on me. People will think I can't even help my own family succeed. And we can't have that. Exactly. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft and warm, and for just a moment, I remembered what it felt like to love her. So, what do you say? Can we bail them out? Just this once? I squeezed her hand gently, then let it go. I'll think about it. But I'd already made my decision. Monica and Rick had been stealing from me for months, maybe years. Julia had been lying to me for God knows how long, and Scott Harlan had been screwing my wife in hotel rooms while his own wife tended her garden and planned for a retirement that would never come. Time to even the score. Pete's PI friend was a woman named Sarah Chen. Ironic, considering I'd specifically asked for no one named Chen, but life has a sense of humor about these things. Sarah was sharp, efficient, and expensive, with the kind of professional discretion that came from years of documenting other people's worst moments. "Scott Harlan," she said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table at Denny's. "Mortgage broker, pillar of the community, cheating bastard." I opened the envelope. Photos spilled out. Scott and Julia at the Marriott, Scott and Julia at a cabin in Hocking Hills, Scott and Julia in his office after hours. But there were other photos, too. Scott with a blonde woman I didn't recognize. Scott with a brunette who looked barely old enough to drink. "Your wife's not his only extracurricular activity," Sarah said, sipping her coffee. "Guy's been running a one-man dating service for the past 2 years. Jesus. Gets better. See this?" She pointed to a bank statement. "Scott's been skimming from his clients' escrow accounts. Nothing huge, just a few hundred here and there, but it adds up. We're talking about maybe 30,000 over the past 18 months. Is that legal? Hell no. It's embezzlement. Federal crime if any of those transactions crossed state lines, which they did." I studied the documents, my mind racing. What about his marriage? Angela Harlan filed for divorce yesterday. Seems someone tipped her off about her husband's afternoon activities. I kept my face neutral. Bad timing for Scott. Gets worse. She's asking for everything. House, cars, his half of the business, plus alimony. And she's got a good lawyer. I paid Sarah her fee and drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat, feeling like a man carrying dynamite. Julia was at another client meeting, and Emma was at her friend's house, which gave me time to plan. First, I made copies of everything. The photos, the bank statements, the evidence of Scott's embezzlement. Then I sat down at my computer and started typing. The anonymous email went to Scott's business partners first. Just a simple message. Thought you should know what Scott's been doing with client funds. See attached documents. The second email went to the local real estate board. Concerned citizen reporting unethical behavior by licensed mortgage broker. The third email went to every real estate agent in town. FYI, Scott Harlan is under investigation for embezzlement. Might want to distance yourselves from any joint ventures. I hit send on all 3 and leaned back in my chair. In the digital age, destroying someone's reputation was as easy as clicking a button. But I wasn't done yet. Julia came home at 10:30 that night, her hair mussed and her blouse wrinkled. She had a new story ready, something about showing a house to out-of-town clients who could only meet after business hours. "How did it go?" I asked from the couch, not looking up from my book. "Good. Really good. They're interested in the Patterson place. The Patterson place had been sold 6 months ago. Julia was getting sloppy with her lies, probably because she thought I was too stupid to check. That's great, honey. By the way," Monica called. Julia froze in the doorway. What did she want? She's pretty upset about the business situation. Says she might have to declare bankruptcy. "Tom, we talked about this. If you could just—" "I've been thinking about what you said," I interrupted. "About family being important." Hope flickered in her eyes. "And you're right. Family should stick together. That's why I'm planning something special." "What kind of special?" I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was genuine. "It's a surprise." The next morning, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented across town. Inside were boxes of documents, financial records, business correspondence, and a few items I'd liberated from Rick and Monica's office during my last visit, including Monica's laptop, which she'd carelessly left unlocked. The laptop contained 3 years of email correspondence, including several exchanges with Rick about creative accounting and keeping Tom in the dark. There were also emails with Julia discussing my stupidity and their plans to milk the cash cow until I figured out what was happening. The cash cow. That's what they called me. I copied everything to a flash drive and returned the laptop to its box. Then I drove to the office of the local newspaper. The Millfield Gazette wasn't exactly the Washington Post, but it served our little community with the kind of dogged determination that made small-town journalism both admirable and dangerous. The editor, a woman named Patricia Webb, had been documenting local corruption for 20 years. "Mr. Grady," she said, looking over the documents I'd spread across her desk. "This is quite a story. I thought you might find it interesting. Local business owners embezzling from silent partner, mortgage broker stealing from clients, real estate agent facilitating fraudulent transactions." She looked up at me. "You realize this is going to destroy several people's lives. They should have thought of that before they decided to destroy mine." Patricia studied my face. "This is personal." "Very. And you want what in return?" "Nothing. Just the truth." She nodded slowly. "The truth has a way of being expensive, Mr. Grady. For everyone involved." "I'm counting on it." The story ran 3 days later, front page above the fold. Local business leaders accused of financial misconduct. Patricia had done her homework, interviewing victims of Scott's embezzlement and clients who'd been overcharged by Rick and Monica's construction company. Julia's name appeared 17 times in the article, mostly in connection with real estate transactions that had facilitated Scott's schemes. Nothing illegal, but damning enough to raise questions about her judgment and professional ethics. I was drinking my morning coffee when Julia stumbled into the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear and her face pale as winter. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Patterson, but I had no idea that Scott was—" She caught sight of me and lowered her voice. "Can we discuss this later? I'm sure we can work something out." She hung up and stared at me. "Did you see the newspaper?" "Terrible thing," I said, turning the page. "Who would have thought Scott was stealing from his clients?" "Tom, this is serious. My reputation will probably recover, assuming you haven't done anything actually illegal." Her phone rang again, then again. By the time I left for work, she'd received 8 calls from angry clients and former business partners. The best part came that afternoon, when I stopped by Harlan Mortgage to pick up some documents for a client. The office was in chaos, boxes everywhere, employees packing their personal belongings, Scott nowhere to be seen. His secretary, a nervous woman named Linda, recognized me from company parties. "Oh, Mr. Grady, I'm sorry, but Mr. Harlan isn't available." "That's okay. I heard about the troubles. Terrible situation." "The bank froze all our accounts this morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The FBI was here yesterday asking questions, and Mrs. Harlan's lawyer served papers demanding immediate asset seizure." "What about Scott?" He's staying at the Motel 6 out by the highway. His wife changed the locks. I drove past the Motel 6 on my way home. Scott's BMW was parked outside room 127, looking as defeated as its owner probably felt. I didn't stop, but I did take a picture. For my collection. That evening, Julia was waiting for me in the living room, still in her work clothes, her makeup streaked from crying. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About us. About our marriage. About what's been happening." I sat down across from her, noting how she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I'm listening. Tom, I know things have been difficult lately. With the business, with my work schedule, with everything that's been going on." "Mm-hmm. And I know you're angry about the Monica and Rick situation. Among other things." She looked up sharply. "What other things?" "Julia, how long have you been sleeping with Scott Harlan?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Julia's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, resignation. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more honest than it had been in months. "It started 6 months ago. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just, I don't know, excitement, I guess. Something different." Different from what? From this. She gestured around the room. From our life. From being married to a handyman who's content to fix other people's problems while his own world falls apart. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. I see. Tom, I never meant for it to go this far. And I certainly never meant for you to get hurt. But I did get hurt. We both know that. Yes. Her voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd built our life together. Julia, do you remember our wedding day? Of course. You promised to love me for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Tom, I kept my promises. All of them. Even when you decided I wasn't good enough anymore. Even when you started lying to me every single day. Even when you let your sister steal from me while you were screwing another woman's husband. I turned to face her. But you know what? You were right about one thing. You could have done better than me, and now you're going to get the chance to prove it. What do you mean? I pulled the divorce papers from my jacket pocket and set them on the coffee table. I mean, it's over, Julia. Our marriage, your career, your little fantasy about running away with Scott Harlan. All of it. She stared at the papers like they might bite her. Tom, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can... Scott's broke, Julia. His wife is taking everything. The FBI is investigating his business, and he's living in a motel room that smells like disinfectant and broken dreams. How do you... And Monica and Rick are filing for bankruptcy. Turns out when you steal from your business partner, there are consequences. Julia's face crumpled. You did this. All of it. You destroyed them. No, Julia. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure everyone found out about it. I walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Julia? Pack your things. You have until Sunday to find somewhere else to live. You can't kick me out of my own house. I smiled, and this time it was sharp enough to cut glass. Actually, I can. See, this house is in my name only. Bought it with money from my father's estate, remember? You never bothered to get your name on the deed because you were too busy climbing the social ladder to worry about legal details. The look on her face was worth every penny I'd spent on revenge. Emma. We'll be fine. She's staying with me, in the house she's always known as home. You can have visitation rights, assuming you can afford a lawyer. I left her sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she'd built on lies and other people's money. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, full of the promise of winter and new beginnings. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The war wasn't over yet, but I was winning. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of brutal clarity that makes everything look sharp-edged and unforgiving. I was making pancakes for Emma when Julia came downstairs with 2 suitcases and the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd spent the night staring at the ceiling. Where are you going to stay? I asked, not because I cared, but because Emma was listening from the living room. Monica's, the word came out bitter, assuming she'll still talk to me after what you did to her business. What I did? I flipped a pancake with more force than necessary. Julia, I didn't make Monica steal from the company. I didn't make Rick falsify expense reports. I just stopped letting them use my money to do it. She set her suitcases by the door. You could have handled this privately. You didn't have to destroy them publicly. Like you handled your affair privately? Emma appeared in the doorway, her 12-year-old face serious. Mom, are you really leaving? Julia knelt down and pulled Emma into a hug. Just for a little while, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy need some time to figure things out. Because you were kissing Mr. Harlan? Julia's face went white. I kept cooking, but I was listening to every word. Emma, where did you hear? I saw you, Emma said simply. Last week, when you picked me up from Sarah's house. You were in his car in the parking lot. You looked like people do in movies before they get married. Julia looked at me over Emma's head, her expression a mix of horror and accusation, as if somehow this was my fault too. Emma, I said, why don't you go finish getting ready for school? After Emma left, Julia stood up slowly. How long has she known? Kids see everything, Julia. They just don't always understand what they're seeing until the adults start acting weird about it. This is going to mess her up. Probably. But not as much as growing up in a house full of lies would have. Julia picked up her suitcases. At the door, she turned back. Tom, I know you hate me right now, but Emma loves me. Don't use her to punish me. I wouldn't do that. Promise me. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 15 years ago. Scared, vulnerable, trying to do right by her daughter even as her world collapsed around her. I promise, I said. But Julia? Emma's going to have questions, and I'm going to answer them honestly. She nodded and left, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. That afternoon, Pete stopped by with a six-pack and the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from watching justice served cold. Heard Julia moved out, he said, settling into his usual chair in my workshop. News travels fast. Small town. Everyone knows everything. He popped open a beer. Also heard Scott Harlan got arrested yesterday. I looked up from the cabinet door I was sanding. Arrested? FB. I picked him up at that motel. Turns out embezzling from federally insured bank accounts is a big deal. Who knew? I kept sanding, but I was smiling. Any word on charges? Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Angela's lawyer really did her homework. Scott's looking at 5 to 10 years, assuming he doesn't cop a plea. And Angela? She's doing fine. Filed an insurance claim on the house. Apparently, Scott took out a policy that covers financial crimes committed by spouses. Smart woman. We drank in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sound of sandpaper on wood and the distant hum of suburban life continuing around us. Tom, Pete said finally, you know this isn't over, right? What do you mean? Julia's not going to just disappear. She's going to fight for custody, for alimony, for whatever she can get. And she's got family who blame you for their problems. Let them blame me. Rick came by the house yesterday. He was pretty worked up. I stopped sanding. What did he want? To know if I could talk sense into you. Said the family's falling apart because of your midlife crisis. What did you tell him? I told him that maybe the family was already falling apart and you just stopped pretending otherwise. The next morning, I got a call from Emma's school. She'd been in a fight with another student, something about the newspaper article and people talking about her family. I found her in the principal's office, her knuckles scraped and her chin set in a stubborn line that reminded me of myself at that age. Want to tell me what happened? I asked as we walked to the truck. Katie Morrison said you were a loser and Mom was a whore. And you hit her? I pushed her. She fell down and scraped her knee. Emma, I know I shouldn't have pushed her. But she was lying. I stopped walking. About what? About you being a loser. You're not a loser, Dad. You fix things. You make things better. Something tight in my chest loosened. Thank you, sweetheart. But what about your mom? Emma was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what a whore is, but I know Mom hurt you, and I know she's been lying about where she goes at night. I put my arm around her shoulders. Your mom made some bad choices, but she's still your mom and she loves you. Do you still love her? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I love who she used to be. But people change, Emma. Sometimes they change into someone you don't recognize anymore. That evening, Monica called. Her voice was thick with tears and rage. Tom, you bastard. How could you do this to us? Monica, Rick's in the hospital. He had a heart attack this morning. The stress, the bankruptcy, losing everything. It's killing him. I felt a stab of guilt, quickly followed by anger. Monica, Rick stole from me. You both did. For months, maybe years. It was just a loan. We were going to pay it back. With what money? You were barely breaking even as it was. We're family, Tom. Family doesn't destroy each other over money. You're right, I said. Family doesn't steal from each other either. She hung up on me. An hour later, Julia called. Tom, Rick's in the hospital. I heard. Monica blames you. I'm sure she does. Tom, he could die. Julia, Rick's heart attack isn't my fault. His diet, his smoking, his stress about getting caught stealing, those are his problems. You're heartless. I'm practical. There's a difference. But after I hung up, I sat in my workshop for a long time, staring at the tools that had built my life and wondering if revenge was worth the cost. The answer came the next day when I found Emma crying in her room. What's wrong, sweetheart? Some kids at school are saying terrible things about our family. About Mom and Mr. Harlan and Uncle Rick and the money. I sat down on her bed. What kind of things? That we're criminals. That Mom's a bad word. That you're mean and angry and that's why Mom left. And what do you think? Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. I think grown-ups are stupid. And I think I want to go live with Grandma and Grandpa in Florida. That night, I called my parents. They'd retired to a small town near Tampa, where my father spent his days fishing, and my mother tended a garden that would have made Eden jealous. Tom, my mother said, we heard about Julia. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. But Emma's having a hard time. Of course she is. Poor baby. I was wondering, would it be possible for her to come visit for a few weeks? Maybe finish out the semester down there? Of course. We'd love to have her. What about school? There's a good elementary school right here in town. We'll get her enrolled. After I hung up, I went to Emma's room. She was reading, or pretending to read, her face still puffy from crying. How would you like to spend some time with Grandma and Grandpa? Her face lit up. In Florida? Really? Really. Just until things settle down here. What about you? I'll be fine. And I'll visit as soon as I can. Promise? Promise. 2 days later, I put Emma on a plane to Tampa. Watching her walk down the jetway with her little rolling suitcase nearly broke my heart, but I knew it was the right thing to do. She needed to be away from the wreckage of our family, at least for a while. With Emma gone, I was free to focus on the final phase of my plan. Julia had moved in with Monica, but Monica's house was in foreclosure. They were both working at a discount real estate office across town, splitting commissions and trying to rebuild their reputations. Scott was in federal custody, awaiting trial. Rick was recovering from his heart attack, but the medical bills were crushing what was left of their finances. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt empty. That's when Julia called with an offer. Tom, we need to talk. About what? About ending this. All of it. The divorce, the fighting, the public humiliation. I'm listening. Meet me at Denny's tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Just you and me. Why? Because I have something you want. Which is a way to make this right. For Emma's sake. I almost said no. Almost told her that nothing she could offer would undo what she'd done. But something in her voice, a note of desperation maybe, or genuine remorse, made me curious. Fine. 8 o'clock. Tom? Come alone. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what Julia thought she could possibly offer that would interest me now. I was about to find out. Denny's at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night was exactly as depressing as it sounded. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the coffee look like motor oil and the customers look like extras from a zombie movie. Julia was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had probably been sitting there for an hour. She looked older than her 37 years, worn down by weeks of stress and public humiliation. "Thanks for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "What do you want, Julia?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "These are copies of every financial document related to Rick and Monica's business. Bank statements, loan applications, tax returns, everything. I didn't touch the envelope. And they've been stealing from more than just you, Tom. Their clients, their suppliers, even their employees withholding taxes. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 3 years. Why are you telling me this? Because I helped them do it." The words hung between us like a confession at a murder trial. Julia's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "I helped them set up shell companies to hide the money. I helped them create fake invoices and phony expense reports. I used my real estate connections to launder payments through property transactions." Jesus, Julia. I know how bad it sounds. But Tom, they're family. And they were desperate. So you became criminals together. We became stupid together. She pushed the envelope toward me. "But here's the thing. Monica doesn't know I kept copies of everything. And she doesn't know that I documented every conversation we had about the money." I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Bank records, email printouts, handwritten notes in Julia's distinctive scrawl. It was enough evidence to put Rick and Monica in prison for a decade. "What do you want in return?" "A clean divorce. No alimony, no property settlement, joint custody of Emma. You keep the house, I keep my car and whatever's left of my business." "That's it? That's it?" I studied her face, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden agenda. But Julia looked genuinely defeated, like a poker player who'd finally run out of bluffs. "Why now?" I asked. "Because Monica's planning to blame everything on you. She's going to tell the FBI that you were the mastermind, that you forced them to steal the money and hide it offshore." "That's ridiculous. I can prove—" "Can you?" "Tom, you pulled $47,000 out of their business account the day before the newspaper story broke. You hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Scott. You've been systematically destroying everyone who crossed you." She was right, and we both knew it. From the outside, it could look like I was the criminal and everyone else was just collateral damage. "Monica's already talked to a lawyer," Julia continued. "She's going to make a deal with the feds, testify against you in exchange for immunity. Even though it's not true? Especially because it's not true. Monica's desperate, Tom. She'll say anything to avoid prison." I leaned back in the booth, processing the information. "And you're offering to testify against Monica instead?" "I'm offering to tell the truth. About who really stole the money, who really planned the whole thing, and who's really responsible for Rick's heart attack. In exchange for a clean divorce. In exchange for protecting Emma from having a father in federal prison." It was a good offer, maybe too good. "What's the catch, Julia?" "No catch. I'm tired, Tom. Tired of lying, tired of fighting, tired of watching our daughter suffer because her parents can't act like adults." "What about Scott?" "Scott's going to prison. That part of my life is over." "Do you love him?" The question surprised both of us. Julia was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the parking lot where our marriage had effectively ended. "I thought I did," she said finally. "But I think I was just in love with the idea of being someone different. Someone more exciting than a handyman's wife in a small Ohio town. And now? Now I just want to survive this mess and try to be a decent mother to Emma." I closed the envelope and set it on the table. "I need to think about this. Tom, Monica's meeting with the FBI tomorrow morning. If you're going to use those documents, it has to be tonight. And if I don't, then we both go down. You for conspiracy, me for fraud. Emma grows up visiting her parents in federal prison. Julia stood up, leaving money on the table for her untouched coffee. I'll be at Monica's until midnight. After that, I'm driving to my mother's house in Cincinnati. If you decide to take the deal, call me before I leave." She paused at the edge of the booth. "Tom? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About everything." I sat there for another hour after she left, drinking bad coffee and staring at the envelope that contained enough evidence to destroy what was left of Julia's family. Outside, the parking lot slowly emptied as the dinner crowd gave way to the late-night shift workers and insomniacs who populated places like Denny's after dark. At 10:30, I made my decision. I drove to the FBI field office in Columbus, arriving just as the night shift was settling in. The agent on duty was a tired-looking woman named Detective Sarah Martinez, who listened to my story with the weary patience of someone who'd heard every possible variation of human stupidity. "Mr. Grady, you're telling me that your wife and her family have been running a multi-year embezzlement scheme, and you have documentation to prove it?" "That's right. And you're bringing this to us now because they're planning to frame me for their crimes." Detective Martinez opened the envelope and spread the documents across her desk. Bank records, email printouts, handwritten notes detailing exactly how Rick and Monica had been stealing from their clients and suppliers. "This is quite a collection," she said after 20 minutes of reviewing the evidence. "Where did you get all this?" "My wife kept copies of everything. She was involved in the scheme, but she's willing to testify in exchange for immunity." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "A clean divorce, and the knowledge that my daughter won't grow up thinking her father is a criminal." "Detective." Martinez leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Grady, I have to ask, why didn't you come to us sooner? Some of these documents are dated over a year ago, because I didn't know about them until tonight. I knew Rick and Monica were stealing from me, but I didn't realize how extensive their operation was. So you took matters into your own hands." "I protected my interests. There's a difference." She smiled grimly. "Is there? Mr. Grady, you've systematically destroyed the lives of everyone who crossed you. Your wife's lover is in federal custody. Your business partners are bankrupt. Your wife's career is ruined. That doesn't sound like protecting your interests. That sounds like revenge. Maybe it's both. Maybe it is." Detective Martinez gathered up the documents and slid them back into the envelope. "I'll need your wife to come in tomorrow morning to give a formal statement. And Mr. Grady, this investigation is going to take months. Don't leave town." I drove home through empty streets, past houses where normal families were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their neighbor had just handed over enough evidence to send 3 people to federal prison. At 11:45, I called Julia. "It's done," I said when she answered. "The FBI? They have everything. You need to be at their office at 9 a.m. tomorrow to give a statement." "Tom, Julia, don't thank me. This isn't forgiveness. This is just the least terrible option available." "I know. And Julia? When this is over, when the trials are finished and the appeals are exhausted, I want you to disappear from Emma's life and mine. Clean divorce, minimal contact, no drama. That's not fair. Emma needs her mother. Emma needs stability. She needs to grow up in a home where people tell the truth and keep their promises. You've proven you can't provide that." Julia was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she said, "What if I change? What if I get help and become the person Emma deserves? Then prove it. But prove it somewhere else." I hung up and sat in my empty house, listening to the sounds of a life that had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to my own specifications. No wife, no extended family, no business partners, no complications. Just me and the tools in my garage and the promise of Emma coming home when the dust settled. 3 months later, Rick and Monica were sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Julia received 2 years probation in exchange for her testimony. Scott Harlan got 8 years for embezzlement and fraud. Emma came home from Florida in time for Christmas. tanned and happy and full of stories about her grandparents' adventures in retirement. She asked about her mother exactly once. "Is Mom coming for Christmas?" "No, sweetheart. Mom's starting a new life in Cincinnati." "Are you sad about that?" I thought about it for a moment. "No, Emma. I'm not sad." "Good," she said, and went back to decorating the tree. On New Year's Eve, Pete and I sat in my workshop, drinking beer and watching the snow fall outside. The radio was playing classic rock, and the space heater was humming contentedly in the corner. "Any regrets?" Pete asked. I considered the question. Julia was gone, living in a small apartment in Cincinnati and working for a property management company that didn't do background checks. Rick and Monica were in federal prison, their house foreclosed, their business dissolved. Scott was serving his time in a minimum security facility in West Virginia, probably learning that federal prison was nothing like the movies. Emma was upstairs doing homework, happy and healthy and blissfully unaware that her father had orchestrated the destruction of half her extended family. "No," I said finally. "No regrets. Even about Emma growing up without her mother? Emma's better off without Julia's influence. She'll grow up knowing that actions have consequences and that loyalty matters. And what about you? What happens now?" I looked around my workshop, at the tools that had built my life and the projects that filled my days. Now I fix things. It's what I do. Starting with yourself. I'm not broken, Pete. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the neighborhood in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks were going off, celebrating the end of one year and the beginning of another. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the future, mine and Emma's, and to the satisfaction of a job well done. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving long enough to watch your enemies destroy themselves. And sometimes, when survival isn't enough, you give them a little help along the way. Either way, justice gets served.